We've had a talk from healthcare, the NHS and Seamus this morning. We've talked about, on some of the academic side, I've got lots of scars from working in industry, specifically around the use of electronics. And I want to talk about combination devices. Combination devices are essentially when you have a drug and a device and it's sealed. So think about an injector pen or an inhaler. And my challenge really is the timing right now, and you'll see why timing is actually fundamental here. So, quick overview. I want to talk a bit about patients, because patients really are at the center of everything that the pharma industry does. I want to challenge about connected devices and the opportunities that they offer. I want to talk about some of the problems and the potential that we've seen with the use of connected devices. And I'll conclude on a whole range of topics. And I'm going to fly through this, okay, because there's quite a lot to go through. So digital, it's a vastly overused word, and it just covers so many things. But what I've kind of concerned myself in this presentation is I actually am looking at not just down to device level, but actually the whole infrastructure that you need around a device. A standalone device is not very valuable. A device that is connected is much more valuable, and a device that is not connected to a doctor, that is connected to an NHS, is much, much more valuable. So this connection to me is absolutely vital, and you'll hear from some of the reasons that there's been problems in the past and why now is absolutely the right time. I think the other thing that we have to be careful about here is data, and I'll talk about data, and that's vitally important. But I think the other thing, and I'm sure the reason that we're here today, I'm quite passionate about making sure that we get the hardware right. And it's not just the software, it's the hardware, because this is the thing that actually people have to rely on, trust, and it has to be coming at the right cost. So, the impact on patients. Now, Graham eloquently actually has helped me a lot here. On the age thing, I mean, you'll see here that this is us going from the 50s, yeah, through to where we are kind of now. And I think age is an important thing. And the reason it's important, you've preceded me, so that's fantastic. And that's really helped me out here. But I think that we talk about digitally aware, and I know that as a designer and an engineer, you know, we sit there and go, well, old people aren't going to be able to use this sort of technology. But really, when you're talking about now, I mean, I'm 56, yeah? In 20 years' time, I'll be 76, and I'm kind of au fait with some of this technology, but we mustn't forget patients have to use this. Now, the ideal thing is they don't know they're using it, but this is going to take time. But age is fundamental here. And the aging population is a massive problem. I think the other thing is we talk about illness, but I think we should be talking about wellness as well. I mean, we should be using things like Fitbits. Look how they've evolved. And they actually are starting to be used. They've been used in clinical studies now, Fitbits. And it's early days, but Fitbits have been used to show that when people take a medicine, they essentially move more. It's not rocket science, but it's enough to do a post-launch study and get that justification for the price of your medicine. So that's important. I think we also talked a bit about, it's not just patients taking medicines properly. I think there's an opportunity for earlier detection and management and monitoring and making patients much more part of that equation. And again, this is why I think connected devices can actually play an important part. We do get a little bit insular, and in pharma, our markets are global. We don't have a UK market, we have a global market, and the reason is, as it was explained earlier, if you're spending a couple of £1 billion developing a drug, it has to meet a global market. And then you have to take in and understand all the different cultures if you're going to start having connected devices. Speed is important, and the reason that speed's important is because it does take about 10 years to develop a drug. That gives you about 10 years to maximize the patent life. Patents typically last about 20 years. So getting there as quickly as you can is important, but also maximizing that time. Now with medical devices, you chop and change. A medical device has a short shelf life. But when you've launched a product, the last thing you want to do is start tweaking and adjusting it, because you've then got to go back to your regulatory documents and readjust them. So solidifying and freezing the use of any technology early on and living with it for a certain amount of time is a challenge. And then the key one here, as far as I'm concerned, with any innovation, you've got to prove the benefit. And this is why I think there's going to be a much more demand on us having sort of an understanding of the total cost of goods and total value, but we're still going to be looking at quality, reliability, and security. And there's a word missing there, safety. So whatever we are doing, we've got to make sure that the connected device doesn't mess up the drug, because the drug is king. And someone keeps telling me that electronics and connected devices are queen, but the drug is king. So the problems that we have, I mean, the main thing is, whatever you do with a medicine, you've done your clinical trial, the medicine works. And it's been well managed through a clinical trial, and then you give it to people and you put it into the real world. And especially if you've got devices, this is when tablets are great. Tablets are the best device in the world because it's pretty straightforward what you do. The minute you start using devices, you've got this potential for variance in performance, especially with things like inhalers when a technique is important. An injector is a little bit straightforward. It's point, bang, hold. Inhalers, there's lots of variables. And again, I think that if we can get the correct techniques put in place and the training right, maybe using the connected devices, that's going to be a step forward. And I've seen electronics starting to be used in trainers more and more, and I do think that this is a valuable forward step. It's getting people used to the use of electronics, they're understanding it. And we also need to make sure that we've got these reminder tools. Did I take my medicine this morning? Did I take it yesterday? So again, this is why connection, it's simple requirements at the moment. And if we can get through this simple stuff, I think there's much more of an opportunity. So we've been working on this challenge for years. So these are some patents. Guess how old these are? Throw me a number. How many years old are these? 20, bang on. Yeah. So we've actually patented stuff 20 years ago that talks about connected devices, and it was a whole range of inhalers, but you'll see here that, we knew and understood this, but the limitation that we had, I've missed a slide here. Right, the limitation, that was the wrong order. The limitations that we had were, we didn't have mobile coverage, so everything was attached to the device, and that was a real downside for us. We didn't have coverage, and when we were actually looking at the electronics in these devices, some of the technology was actually based on the phone card technology, so that when you actually used your dose, it counted down, so it's pretty basic and it's pretty clunky. The blockers, so I had to stand in front of commercial teams and say, we've got these great ideas, and these are the things that were thrown up at us. Software and the hardware, we want to know that they're absolutely reliable and the quality is there. And that was imperative. And that's a difficult thing to justify and test and evaluate, especially when you've got lots of complexity in your device. The actual power that it's using, the size, now 20 years ago, everything was big, and it's miniaturized now, and that's a real benefit. And the other thing is volume. Because within pharma, when we make medicines, these devices are in their millions, hundreds of millions. So you've got to have that scale, and you've got to have that capacity. Designed for assembly. If we're buying in stuff, we've obviously got to make sure it's the right quality, and it's also designed for high-speed assembly. So these are machines that assemble these things. Patient acceptance, I mean, it's a big topic in itself, but a big challenge. So these are, again, nervous risks that were highlighted why we wouldn't do this. Data ownership. Pharma companies on a commercial product that is generating data do not get access to that data. Doctors get access to that data, and the insurance companies. So the pharma companies are going, well, if we can't get access to the data, that's not much good to us. It is useful, though, interestingly, when you're in the clinical trial. And if you're doing your clinical trials, you have got the ownership of that data. And that's where you're starting to see connected devices really gaining traction. Sustainability, I've put this in here because I think this is important. We're being challenged more. Most of these devices are disposable. You use them after a month, you throw them away. I think that's something we've got to understand and not put our head in the sand on this one. And then the other thing is regulatory uncertainty. If you're going to start looking at a new paradigm, the regulations kind of are trying to fit sometimes medical devices, is it a pharma device? And this is where we have had real challenges and not much expertise within pharma companies. So looking at the connected devices, where are we? Well, the good thing is that you actually are starting to see smaller companies biting the bullet and really challenging pharma's attitude. But they are typically being used on devices for clinical trials. They're bolted on. They're not very sexy, but they are there, tied in with apps typically, and they're providing information, and they're reusable. So this is where I'm seeing more of a take-up, more of an acceptance. Pharma's obviously investing in some of these companies. They're getting them to do clinical trials with them, and this is where you're gaining this traction. It is slow, though. Now, the other thing that's happened here is going back to the point where if you're going to start looking at connected devices, you cannot do stuff in isolation. Now, you wait, years for guidance and support and stakeholder buy-in, and then all of a sudden, all your buses come at once. So this was 2017. So within the UK, we had five actually, quite important documents were released. Each of them talks about the importance of digital, and I'll talk about them individually now because they are important documents, and if you're involved in this industry, I would strongly advise you to read them. So the first one, this was actually pharma, actually were involved in the creation of this document, and it was kind of a roadmap because we saw that aerospace had a roadmap and they'd got government support. Automotive had done the same. Pharma hadn't. So the pharma industry in the UK sat down with our representative bodies, and what we did is we said we need a technology and innovation roadmap that looks ahead. And what we had is we were recommending different centres. Now some of these have actually been put in place already. And what we said was that we needed to look at 13 different technology and innovation pillars that would support these centres of excellence. Now the good news for digital is that vast majority of those 13 saw a real opportunity to incorporate some form of digital technology. Now that can be right down to the patient level, but it also looks at distribution networks, supply chains, even the way that we actually make and manufacture our medicines, because there's an awful lot of digital technology used already in making medicines. And the reason that we think that this is absolutely vital and the opportunity is that if we can invest in this, the output inevitably will be, hopefully, more economic production within the UK. And having these centres of excellence is vital. This was the document that actually came from Sir John Bell, who was the head of the NHS, and one of the pillars that he highlighted, again, really helpfully, and a core stakeholder, is the use of digital. Now again, that was all-encompassing, but it does talk about the use of smart sensors in that bottom bullet point there. But they were looking at the use of digital, again, across the whole supply chain. And again, this is a hugely valuable document to industry because it says that you're going to get support, and it highlights and it's written down. Another document, the Made Smarter Review. This looked at different industries. This was actually co-authored by Jürgen Meyer, who's the head of Siemens. Pharma got a slot in there, which was good, with other industries such as construction. But again, when we worked with CPI on this, and the nice thing is that we actually broke down throughout the development process, all the way from medicine manufacture, all the way to actually looking at recycle and recovery, a strategy. And if you haven't got a strategy, you haven't got a discussion. And this is why it's important that we did this just over a year ago. But again, you can see all these documents are coming together. So what? It's back down to, I think what Seamus said. So it is the start of alignment from stakeholders regarding digital, and it is in all its guises. I think packaging will do much more than protect medicine. I think packaging has the opportunity here to help patients manage their diseases. And as you were saying, that is, at least with certainly older people, they're on 6-8 medicines. How do you manage that? And I'm sure we've got older parents who have a medicine cabinet and full of medicines. But there's an opportunity here to help manage not just the intake of your medicine, but also ultimately your disease. I think it definitely will enhance the patient experience. And if you've got more understanding of how your medicines are being used and when they're being used, you will have a more efficient supply chain. And don't forget, within pharma, from someone ordering a medicine in commercial and getting that to the patient can take 8 months, 9 months, 10 months. So having that smart supply chain is vital. We are looking inevitably to speed up our development times, and anything that we can use to do that is vital, especially in clinical trials because they take so long. And if you've got ongoing data input, it's a very valuable tool to speed up the time of your clinical supply. I think that digital will drive new standards. I have a personal view that we should not have 500 apps that are all different. We should have a common language that patients can understand, even common colors, so that there's no confusion or there's less confusion. To do this, industry does need to work together. And again, we've got these documents that starts to tell this story. We do need to share some of the platforms. This shouldn't be competitive. This should be something that we can all share as an industry. It's like cars and batteries. We're all going to need electric cars, but you don't want battery companies arguing against each other. My battery's better than yours. Whereas if we can get some sort of consensus and investment in standardizing here, and hopefully, if we get this right, it should be a race to the top. So last thing, I'm passionate about the software and the hardware working together. You can't have one faster than the other. They need to be constantly pushing each other's capabilities. I think that we've actually got to understand the real needs of patients, and we can go down the road where we think what a patient needs and wants, and we're wrong. We really need to test any use of connected devices. Test and test and test and refine. Don't just get it out there. We have to test it and understand the value behind it. We are getting traction from payers. I mean, we had an example earlier on where obviously Philips, companies are getting involved, especially if it's out-of-pocket payers that aren't supported by their national health services. So it's not just your NHS and your insurance company. Don't forget, parts of the world, people buy their own medicines. So getting this done is correct. And the other thing that I think that we need to get right is effective training. The more complex the device, the larger the training requirement is needed. Electronics, we do need this scale-up capacity, and you do need to be able to supply, and it has to be absolutely reliable. You don't want them breaking down, and it's got to be at the right cost. Standardization, I'm a massive fan of. The more that we can standardize, the better. I think we're going to have a grown-up conversation about data ownership. Doctors don't like technology. Don't be fooled, right? And if you think a doctor's got 10,000 patients easily on their list, and they've got 10,000 pieces of information coming in, multiply that by 6 because you're taking more than one drug. What are they going to do with that information? We've got to be really smart about what we do with data. I think that we should use clinical trials to really understand the opportunity behind connected devices and then go commercial. And there's a real risk here, because if you say your connected device has worked so well, it's actually improved the efficacy of that medicine and the use of that medicine, you could be forced to launch that product with the electronics involved. And that's a barrier that people don't talk about. And I think we have to understand that one a little bit more. We can learn from consumer healthcare because there's less regulations with consumer healthcare. And I think that we should, as an industry, not be frightened to look at, things that help your toothbrush, help you brush your teeth, and make you brush your teeth twice a day. It's no different from using a device properly and using it twice a day. And if we can learn from that. And then my last thing here is there are new players. So these images are patents one's from Apple, one's from Amazon. A health watch from Apple and Amazon are offering a med service. You probably know about these already, but these are the guys that are going to change the market. It's not going to be the pharma companies, but the pharma companies have to be sat around that table. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have any questions for Greg?
How do you think patients will respond to the information about the healthcare and treatment that just will stop the cloud?
I don't think patients have got a choice. It's the government, it's the regulators who are going to say you can't do that unless you tick a box.
Thinking in terms of the acceptance of patients, some people are very skeptical.
Sure. Completely a GDPR. We've got so many discussions to have to talk about this. Now, when you do a clinical trial, that's fine because you're getting paid to provide, and I think it's a safety thing there because if you're using the device properly and taking the medicine properly, you're getting a very concise idea about the effectiveness of that medicine, and the data is owned by the pharma company. But the minute you go into the Wild West of post-launch, how are we going to do that? Who's going to run that? I mean, personally, I would like to see the government doing it, obviously, because they're the payer. And that data, are we going to be using AI to analyze that data? Are we going to have someone sort of, looking at a chart for individual patients, not with the many millions of patients and the many millions of drugs? Again, this is why, even simple things like safety issues, we have got serialization that's coming into Europe. I think it's here now, where each pack is uniquely identified. So you can get information, but I think that the pharma industry has been working so hard to meet that requirement to get labeling done for not medical devices, pharmaceutical devices. I think the next step from having that capability and understanding and managing that amount of data, that's when I think that we will start maybe saying, actually, there's some real opportunities here. But nothing's going to happen until you have a box that says, I consent to give that information. And I personally, I can see it, if you've got a diabetic. I was talking to a diabetic last week, and he said, I'd be quite happy to have a connected device. And I went in, I plugged it in, and the doctor would sit down at my annual review, and he would see how I'm managing my disease. It's a bit late if he's only doing it once a year, but that's maybe a solution. It's very complicated, and I think there's so many discussions have got to happen, but they are happening now, and everyone's kicking the ball around the net, but no one's chucking it back in there yet. That's the bottom line, and it's because of volume, it's because of reliability, complexity, and don't forget, most pharma companies have spent millions of pounds building their assembly lines, and then someone comes along and says, oh, can you just stick a chip in there? It's not going to happen. Batteries. I mean, we're not going to use batteries. We'll use NFC, without a doubt.
Okay, Greg, thank you very much. I'm sorry, in the interest of time,
No,
we're
no,
going
no.
to have to cut you slightly short on that. So Greg's around, obviously, to answer any further questions, should you be interested in how the pharmaceutical supply chain and how to contact those guys.